the Russia-Ukraine war could end. Glenn, over to you. What do you think on the issue? And then I'll offer my 2 cents.
Well, the most immediate change in the equation of the Ukraine war is the accession of Donald Trump to the White House again. And everyone knows really his sympathy for Russia, hostility to Ukraine, and likely lower willingness, probably unwillingness to provide the same level of material and financial support from the United States to Ukraine. All of that will certainly change the situation. I don't know that peace will come either from pressure from the outside or from changes in the levels of support in 2025. But they may. U.S. support could diminish for Ukraine. The Europeans could run out of gas, almost literally. That's not literally true since the U.S. provides it now. No, but they may not find themselves able or willing to sustain the same levels of support for Ukraine. Both of those things are quite possible. On the battlefield, the stasis that we all observe, I think, is largely an accurate assessment of the state of play. Ukraine, of course, is much smaller, has a smaller industrial base, 1/3 the population, hasn't focused on military production or having large stockpiles. All of that is true. However, it has killed 1 million Russian soldiers, killed and or maimed, 1,000 of whom are being killed or maimed per day. Now, in Russia, can Russia sustain its war effort? The portrayal and the impression of the Russian economy being having weathered the storm of sanctions and the war pretty well, I think is actually a bit misleading or inaccurate. The inflation pressures are great. The exchange reserves are significantly depleted. Investment in the defense industry has significantly increased at the cost, quite literally, of to the rest of the economy. Of the 140 million population in Russia, 1 million males have fled the country. 1 million are dead. The potential pool of soldiers is about 35 million. And the strains are real, and I think will become, if not decisive, substantially greater in 2025. You change the specific data, and those realities or pressures are similar in Ukraine, and so that comes down to the level of support. I don't doubt the will of the Ukrainian state and people to maintain the conflict if they have the means. So for me, it all depends on Western support as to whether the war will continue. But the pressures for a negotiated settlement will become significantly greater, certainly this year, than any time since the invasion in 2022.
So, Glenn, I think the Russian economy obviously is going through inflation, but wages are rising too. And it has managed inadvertently to solve the one biggest problem that plagued it since my days as a corporate lawyer, and before that, my days from the very days the Soviet Union fell, and that was capital flight. Western sanctions mean that capital flight, which is Russian oligarchs selling oil and gas, nickel, or whatever commodity, and then taking that money and buying Chelsea Football Club or yachts in Monaco, that has ended. So you get the circulation of the lower amount of money that Russia now makes selling oil and gas to, say, China and India and other developing countries or emerging markets, whatever you want to call them, now remaining within Russia and creating a multiplier effect. They've also reindustrialized for the first time since 1991. This is not something to be scoffed at or to ignore. This is something that everyone in the West is trying to do. GDP does not equal industrial power or manufacturing capacity, and they have increased it. They've also managed to have parallel channels of trade and even finance. We saw so many people show up to meet Putin on Russian soil this year. And so clearly, the only people following Western sanctions are the West. The rest of the
Well,
world doesn't.
nice Burkina Faso went, but I'm not expecting them to help particularly hold
No, but
Russia together.
the Chinese and the Brazilians
China and
and
India,
the South
China and
Africans
India.
and Indians are big buyers. So
The great moral
and
powers, China and India. Well, that's correct.
well, the per capita GDP of 2,448, as per last year's statistics, means that no Indian leader is going to import inflation. And they will say, hang on a minute, Africa is under fire. Why do the white people care about Africa? So they have their own set of incentives. They are as selfish or as altruistic as Western leaders.
There, there.
But important thing is that um, Russians can take pain. My estimation is they will be able to take whatever pain, both in human and economic terms. More importantly, Ukraine's economy has cratered. We talked about it in the past. Some estimates say by a third, some say by even more, 40%, 40+%. Young men have fled Ukraine even more than in Russia. Ukraine's casualties are much higher than it officially admits, and the official number is 400,000. Ukrainians say regularly to news organizations such as the BBC, not a Russian propaganda arm, casualties are underreported, equipment is running low, they don't have basic stuff at the ground level. Yes, they've fought very bravely, they have demonstrated enormous courage and grit, and they've defended their territory, but they're also suffering. The economy has imploded, and more importantly, Ukraine has run out of men. They simply do not have enough men to fight anymore. Um, Now, Ukraine is also losing territory consistently. Russians have adopted the meat grinder approach. They are winning the war on attrition, war off attrition. And most importantly, and this is where I agree with you, Glenn, that the war depends on Western support. Agree 100%. And let's talk about what I'm finding amongst all my friends in politics in the West, especially in Germany. Their people, their voters do not want endless war. Both the far right and far left in Germany want rapprochement with Russia. German business leaders increasingly blame German politicians for blindly following the US and causing deindustrialization of the country. Now, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was protectionist, didn't help. That really angered German business. And that's not to be scoffed at, because at the end of the day, if you are facing recession for the second year running, if AfD is now the number 2 party in the polls, you can't just say, no, we will carry on. That's like being an ostrich and putting your head in the sand. The Zeitenwende that Olaf Scholz mentioned has not come to pass, but the zeitgeist has changed. And we saw in France as well, the rise, continuing strength of Marine Le Pen. And we see Robert Fico in Slovakia and Vladimir Putin saying, oh, Slovakia could be a mediator. Or we see Viktor Orban in Hungary. We look at the change now in political climate, the zeitgeist, as I said, in Europe, and it is clear Europe is not willing to support Ukraine. And so, yes, the Ukrainians will fight, the Russians will fight, and yes, the war will carry on for now. But the second half of the year, pressure will be on for some negotiated ceasefire, if not a peace agreement, and Russia will retain a lot of Ukrainian territory. This is of course, my view. Glenn, of course, has a slightly different view, but this is where we stand on this issue.
Yeah, I would hardly hope, and certainly hope not to, but would not define Europe's feelings by reference to Slovakia and Hungary, who are the 2 outliers, unfortunately. But Tensions are certainly growing, and pressure to end the bloodletting will increase. I think the Ukrainian economy has been more resilient than you describe, but it's a smaller state, and life is hard.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.